Good morning and welcome to Hot Topics. I'm President of the Petoskey Chamber, and we're very happy you could be here on a Monday morning for a U.S. Chamber federal legislative update. Before we get started, I want to take a quick moment to thank our sponsors, Comfort Keepers and Citizens National Bank. Today's important virtual event comes to you free of charge because of their support. Hot Topics is a program where we offer the community the opportunity to have conversations and learn more about critical issues, and has long been sponsored by Comfort Keepers. So right now, I would like to have Russ Knopp join me on the virtual stage to say a few words. Ryan and I on the stage. So I will make sure that Russ comes up because, you know, sometimes it's just not working. All right, let's try again, Russ. See if you get it this time.
Gotcha. Thanks, Nikki.
There we go.
Well, good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. My name's Russ Knopp, and my wife Leslie and I own Comfort Keepers in northern Michigan. We help seniors stay independent, live in their homes. We've been proud to partner with the Petoskey Area Chamber of Commerce to bring you hot topics for a long time, and I'm proud to say we never run out of hot topics. There's always something. So today is it's great to always have Ryan come and give us a federal update and give us a little look behind the curtain. So thanks, everybody. I hope you enjoyed today's presentation.
Thank you so much, Russ. We appreciate that. And so our secondary sponsor that we normally have, who was unable to join us today, but we want to give a big thank you to, is Citizens National Bank. So the Hot Topics programs that we do fall underneath a broader umbrella called our Winfluence programming. And that is a programming that we've put together that's very broad scope, but it's aimed at building stronger businesses through education and enrichment. So a special thank you to Citizens National Bank for their support as well. So let's get started with today's program. We completely encourage you to use the chat feature if you have questions, as we will be addressing them at the end. That's going to be up on the right panel there for you. Also, our lovely little remote platform, for those of you who are used to it, if you notice, you can see little icons down at the bottom. That's a brand new feature that just went into effect yesterday. So it's new to us, as it is probably new to you as well, but think of it a typical way to react for a presenter, and so that's a good thing from a presenter standpoint, trust me. So let's get going. We're joined by Ryan Gleason, who is the manager of the Great Lakes region for the Congressional and Public Affairs Division at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, working throughout Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. We are excited for Ryan to join us today for this federal legislative update with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So Ryan, I'm going to step back and let you begin, and we'll start sharing screens and have some good fun. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Nikki, for having me. It's good to be with the Petoskey Chamber. I have to say, you guys are a very lucky chamber with the sort of format that you have for these get-togethers, much better than Zooms and Teams. So good stuff there. A couple things to note before we get into the presentation from the Chamber's perspective. A pretty exciting time. Last month, you may have seen Suzanne Clark took over as president and CEO of the Chamber, replacing the great Tom Donahue. So we're excited to have her leadership. Also on the call in our Great Lakes region, we have a third person added to our team, Laura Mannion. She is right outside the Philadelphia area, brings a breadth of experience in Pennsylvania politics, and then had government affairs at Villanova University. So we're excited to have her on the team as well. Excuse me. So we'll get into the conversation for today. The American Rescue Plan that was signed into law about 1 month ago by President Biden, kind of a 30,000-foot view of what was in it and how we came about, and then what's up, what's next, infrastructure. I'm sure we've heard a lot about that. But before we go into all that, the American Rescue Plan that was signed into law last month, unfortunately passed by partisan vote. No Republican voted for it, and only one Democrat voted against it. This is unfortunate to see as we have this new Congress and new administration. Last year, we saw 4 big pieces of legislation related to the pandemic that were all bipartisan. So we're hopeful that for infrastructure, we see some bipartisan support. So if we want to go ahead to the next slide. So what was in the bill? It was a $1.9 trillion of spending, the second most in United States history. Second, of course, to the CARES Act that passed last year that had all those good programs such as the Paycheck Protection Program, the Economic Retention Tax Credit. It was 242 pages. Why do I put that there? Because the original bill was over 600 pages. But there were 400 pages were related to that $15 minimum wage. I'm sure you remember hearing about that. It was going to be incrementally set up to $15 an hour. Luckily, the Senate parliamentarian removed that provision because it didn't fall within the rules. This was good. We thought this was more of a political number than an economic number. Certainly businesses, smaller businesses have been hit the hardest, and those on the lowest wage gaps have been the most affected by the pandemic in the sense of losing their jobs. We saw unemployment support. I'm sure a number of people saw an additional $1,400 check go into their account. As you may remember, President Biden had said, this is going to be a $2,000 check. Well, with the Economic Aid Act that passed at the end of last year, the figure was at $600, plus the $1,400 got you to $2,000. That began to phase out at incomes of $75,000 and then can phased out at $80,000 in all. Additionally, it extended the unemployment insurance through September 6th. That was set to expire last month. That's an additional $300 a week. Originally, the bill had $400 a week. We're happy to see that as a win. As you may recall, during the CARES Act, they had that $600 additional federal benefit. That was really prohibiting some people from returning back to work because they're making more money on unemployment insurance. As we saw last summer, some of these shutdown orders be lifted and stay-at-home orders be lifted. Businesses were getting back to work and employers were asking their employees to return to work. And oftentimes you would find that employees weren't returning back to work because they're making much more on unemployment insurance. We see that perhaps 1 out of every 4 people will be making more on unemployment insurance. So we still have some steps to go to get that fixed. So the majority of where we'll spend our time, with least regard to the American Rescue Plan, is the small business support. Obviously critical. We saw changes to the Paycheck Protection Program, the good program that really tried to keep your payroll going and then provided you money that could be turned into a grant based on mortgage interest tied to businesses, rent, utilities, and then other factors that were included as well. The Shepherd Revenue Operating Grant. This was a grant passed through the Economic Aid Act. It was the first targeted piece of relief, so we're happy to see that. The most exciting one, and that's getting the most conversation, is the new Restaurant Revitalization Program. Again, more targeted relief there. Changes to the Employee Retention Tax Credit really didn't get a lot of attention during the CARES Act because you couldn't pair it with the Paycheck Protection Program. Can now. Idle grant changes, and then some family medical leave changes as well. So if we want to go to the next one. So first, there was state and local funding. There was $195 billion for the states in DC, $130 billion for local. And so what can this money be spent on? Really, it's for your local and state governments to send to households and industries that have been affected by the pandemic. Also, regardless of the pandemic, for waterways, sewage, and broadband. So we're happy to see that as well. Also, government services that were affected by the pandemic. So let's say at the beginning of the pandemic, you saw a loss of revenue. That sort of money can go and help them. We are happy to see that this money can't really bail out these states really that have been financially mismanaged, especially as it relates to pensions. So it can't go to pension funds. Me calling you from Chicago, we know what sort of mess that is here. So Michigan got $5.7 billion, $10.3 billion total between the local county governments. Petoskey got $570,000. So this is where we're really asking you to kind of engage with your local leaders to make sure that money is being allocated in a way that affects you for your business and your community. We're also working with Treasury. We see states be able to kind of reboot their unemployment coffers. We saw a lot of states run out of their unemployment insurance money, especially last year when the pandemic hit and unemployment skyrocketed to over 30%. So we're hoping to see that as well. This also doesn't include the $123 billion through K through 12 education and higher ed. Obviously, we want to see our kids get back to schools in a safe environment. So we also have seen that, as a result of the pandemic, 1 in 5 renters really haven't been able to keep up with the rental insurance. We saw more housing support, $21.5 billion from emergency rental assistance through at the end of September. We saw money for housing vouchers. We heard about tribal and Native Americans, $750 million there. It's also to note that the CDC has pushed back the eviction moratorium to the end of June, so happy to see that as well. If we want to go to the next slide. So expanded child tax credit increases. So if couples making $150,000 or less get to see $3,600 a year for children under the age of 6, $3,000 for children between the ages of 6 and 7. Student forgiveness is tax-free. So we've heard a lot about student loan forgiveness. President Biden really was making that as a pitch on the campaign trail. We heard that a lot kind of in Democratic Party circles. Not the case here, but any sort of student loan legislation that passed by the end of last year and through January of 2026 will be tax-free. And then additionally, we saw, more money for testing and contract tracing, $16 billion for the vaccine distribution, and $19 billion for the public workforce. So those were all good things to see because we're not quite there yet. The light is obviously at the end of the tunnel for the pandemic. I hope many of you on the call have been able to receive a vaccine. So the rollout of that seems to be working well. So if we can go to the next slide. So really the bread and butter here is the small business support, I'm sure, for everyone on the call. So the Paycheck Protection Program, remember, as I said, passed through the CARES Act. We hope that everyone had a chance to at least get into that. There was the economic aid that passed, where you can get that second draw if you used all your PPP. There weren't a lot of big changes to the program for the American Rescue Plan, but there were some to know. First, there's an additional $7.25 billion put into the program. As of a few weeks ago, there was about $66 billion left in the program, so still money to be spent. There was no extension to the American Rescue Plan. However, we were pushing Congress to really make sure that extension happened. That happened a couple of weeks ago because the window to get into the program was March 31st. Now that runs to May 31st, and really because of technical issues, the SBA and your lender are able to work through those issues to make sure that you get that money through the end of June. There's expansion availability for other nonprofits. So, we saw through the Economic Aid Act, we were able to get 501c6s, chambers be eligible for the Paycheck Protection Program. Nikki, I hope you've been able to take advantage of that. But also on top of that, we see 501c5, labor organizations, agricultural organizations get included in this as well. Other expansions, 501c3s, really the most known nonprofits, that's been expanded from 300 to 500 employees. So we're happy to see that as well. So the Shuttered Venue Operations Grant, for those of you that aren't aware of it, that was a targeted relief through the Economic Aid Act that passed at the end of last year, really targeted for, shuttered or for concert halls, theaters, those that have been really hit the hardest, probably are the industries that have been hit hardest the most because they've essentially been closed for well over a year because of, social distancing and guidelines such as not being able to be in crowded areas. So this is really now, there's an additional $1.25 billion. The issue that people were having, especially prior to the expansion or extension of the Paycheck Protection Program, we would get these, operators saying, should I go for the PPP? Should I go for the operations grant? You can now go for both. However, any sort of money that you get for PPP will have to be deducted from the amount that you can get for the grant as well. Unfortunately here, like many government programs, it's still not live. It was supposed to be live last week, on April 8th. This It took over, well over 3 months to get it going. Well, April 8th, they put the portal out there, and sure enough, obviously there were technical issues. I looked as of this morning, it's still not running, but hopefully we can get it by the end of this week. We can go to next slide. So again, here, the most exciting part and what we probably get the most questions about is the restaurant revitalization program. This is a direct grant program, $28 billion for any sort of place that serves food or drink. It's really, it's really open-ended for the people that can get into this. It's $28 billion. Again, here, it's operated by the SBA. As we saw with the Shuttered Live Venue Grant, that obviously still isn't live. We don't expect this to be live, for a while. SBA has come out and said that they'll get that done by the end of the month. We'll see if that actually happens. So this, it really prioritizes, small businesses owned by, women, veterans, and socially and economically distressed individuals. So you can do 20 locations or less. So up to $10 million, or a limit of $5 million per location. So really what you do here is you take your revenue of 2021 and then compare it to any sort of quarter of the loss of revenue to 2019. That's really what you get it to. And again, here a max of $5 million. Much like the Paycheck Protection Program, again, here payroll costs, mortgage payments, rent, but also utilities, maintenance expenses, operation expenses, paid sick leave. And this isn't a tax, not taxable as well. And so the grant amounts here too will be deductible, much like the Paycheck Protection Program as well. If we want to go to the next slide. So again, here we saw some changes to the employee retention tax credit. Again, that didn't really get a lot of attention or was newsworthy because you couldn't pair it with the Paycheck Protection Program. Now you can. It's extended through December 31st. Originally, it was supposed to expire on July 31st. And so it's a loss of 20% or greater any quarter. You get to pick any quarter. Now you get the full year to compare it to. So you get $7,000 per employee per quarter, but so now potentially you can get up to $28,000. You cannot take a tax deduction for the PPP funds. This is an advanceable return as well, so you have to work with the IRS. So you're working with your tax preparer, your accountant, your bookkeeper to really see some sort of advance on that as well. So there was changes to the EIDL grant, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Grant. This is additional $15 billion for economically distressed neighborhoods and for areas of for employees with 300 or less. There's $5 billion for severely impacted. And so what does that mean? Really for mom and pop shops that have 10 employees or less and have seen a 50% or greater loss in revenue. This is exempted from tax as well. Additionally, we saw some family medical leave changes. So that was extended through the end of September of this year. The employer pay increases from 10,000 to 12,000. And the days eligible for employees increases from 50 to 60 days. But perhaps most importantly and interesting that we're seeing is that it includes receiving a recovery from the vaccine. We've seen a number of people who really we waiting in long lines to get vaccines. We've heard of kind of fatigue or illness from getting the shot, particularly the second shot. Now that covers that for employees as well. So if we want to go into the next slide. So really, where are we going? We went from a recession. The economy was doing really well prior to the pandemic. We went through a recession. We're now kind of in a recovery phase. But what's after the recovery phase? After vaccines roll out, really kind of had that herd immunity. Well, then we need to get into a rebuilding phase. And then where does the Chamber's focus on this as well? Well, we have a campaign called Build by the 4th. meaning build by the 4th of July. We're looking for a robust, comprehensive infrastructure package to be passed by Congress by the July 4th. We're not just talking about roads and bridges, but green energy, rural broadband. We've seen the effects of rural broadband, particularly during the pandemic, with people working from home, students having to work from home. We've heard those nightmare stories where households don't have the broadband that they need and would have to go to McDonald's parking lot or a Starbucks parking lot, particularly when the insides were closed, just to use their internet. So we're hopeful that something can happen. And obviously what we've seen on the in the news is that's really the talk of the town. If we want to go into the next slide. So President Biden last month put out his American Jobs Plan, which really is a big infrastructure package. And we think, the premise of it's a really good idea about, repairing roads, highways, bridges, but also broadband, clean energy, and then completing and updating schools. But really what it comes down to is how we're going to pay for it. So we at the Chamber are against a tax overhaul of our corporate taxes and for individuals making over $400,000 because, as we know, small businesses are taxed at the individual tax rate. And so really, what's the outlook right now? We're not seeing a lot of Republican support. Democrats, in order to avoid the filibuster, would need 10 Republicans to get on board. Or they could go through the process of budget reconciliation as they did with the American Rescue Plan. We don't think this is the right approach, but we've already seen a number of senators say we would like to see Republican support, such as Senator Joe Manchin and Senator Kyrsten Sinema. Particularly last week, they put some strong pieces out in the Washington Post and the New York Times. So we're hopeful to see their sort of leadership and that bipartisan effort get done on behalf of Congress. If we'd like to see the next slide. So the key spending provisions for the president's $2.5 trillion plan. So, we see typical transportation infrastructure with roads, bridges, trains, but, we see other things as well that, we want to see, robust water infrastructure, workforce development. That's a big issue that we're pushing at the Chamber. As a result of the pandemic, unfortunately, a number of industries will not be coming back as a result. But as a result, there's also going to be new industries, and employers will be seeking employees to fill those roles. So we want to make sure the employers can find the employees with the skill set necessary in order to complete those jobs. If we want to go to the next slide. So again, here, the revenue provisions that President Biden's put into the tax plan. The one is tax from 21 to 28%. The biggest piece of win that we at the Chamber have had over the past couple of years really was the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. We think that businesses really have suffered greatly as a burden to pay for this sort of infrastructure is dangerous and misguided. You pay for the sort of any sort of way that you'd pay for a major investment of yourself, such as a home, is like over the course of a 30-year period. We think that there should be perhaps a user fee on the table. Gas taxes have been raised in 25 years. We also don't think that raising for those making over $400,000 a year, like many small businesses do, to raise their tax rate from 37 to 39% is the wrong approach. If we'd like to go to the next slide. So the budget reconciliation, again, that passed the American Jobs Act. So how does this work? So it was created in 1974 and provides a kind of legislative tool for measures related to the budget. So this can't be filibustered. So you just need a simple majority in order to pass. Because it would only be able to be debated for 20 hours. So again, a simple majority here. But again, we saw that with the American Rescue Plan. We hope that this isn't the approach that the House and particularly the Senate take, but we're hopeful to have strong allies like Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema to potentially block this so we can see true bipartisan support. And then if we want to go to the next slide. So really, how is this going to look? Well, first and foremost, 54% of Americans think that it's appropriate for there to be a corporate increase for corporations. That's why we, as chambers and members of the chambers, need to make sure that we go out there and educate the American public. President Biden's plan, he says, is going to create 1 million jobs. We think that's great. However, those jobs aren't permanent jobs; they're temporary jobs. The National Association of Manufacturing came out with a poll a few weeks ago saying that the business community will lose 1 million permanent jobs as a result of this. Obviously, this is not what we want to do. We've seen Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell say that this is a Trojan horse for the amount of borrowed money and massive tax increases, that there's really not going to be any Republican support. And then we've seen from Democrats, again, trying to potentially push through the budget reconciliation. But some Democrats think that this bill doesn't go far enough. President Biden originally said this was going to be a $3 trillion plan. Many Democrats would like to see much greater than that. Obviously, we've seen issues with the amount of spending that we've had. It's just related to the pandemic. Whatever you needed to spend really was necessary. But really, how much is necessary to spend here on infrastructure? But if I would like to note, the industries that really are going to be affected the most as a result of this passes because of taxes are, consumer apparel areas, media and entertainment, tech and manufacturing, and then of course mom and pop shops as well. Those are the areas that are going to hurt the most because of this. So we think the blueprint for the plan is the right approach. We think no action is better than, or any action is better than no action. No action is inexcusable. Congress has been talking about this for years and years and years, but never seems to get done. We think this is the year finally for it to happen. And then lastly, the other things that we're focusing on, the PRO Act. This is really that big labor bill, the biggest labor bill that we've really ever seen in American history. We're fighting against it. But again, if the filibuster is defeated and you only need a simple majority in the Senate to pass, you would see the right to work essentially end. The gig economy, independent contractors such as Ubers and Lyfts would also be done. And then we would see card check, mandatory card check, and requiring information for unions and how they vote. And so with that, I will kick it back to you, Nikki, if there's any questions that folks may have on the call. I know that we went over a little over the time, so but any questions that folks may have, be happy to get into.
Thank you very much, Ryan. A lot of information, and by the way, you will also all who attend be able to get these slides so you can dig in a little bit deeper after we're done here. Don't see any questions yet in the chat while people are formulating if they have something to talk about. Tell me a little bit about two things. One that I wanted to highlight on that we highlighted from the U.S. Chamber was a rally for recovery. There's a lot of uncertainty for certain businesses and trying to figure out what's the best way when it comes to that full recovery piece of getting that vaccination in the arms, as they say, of your employees and supporting them. So Chamber had a great program that they put out in conjunction, it's my understanding, with the White House for the Rally for Recovery. So I'll put that link in there, but you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, good question. So obviously we want to make sure that businesses can get back as soon as these vaccinations are out there. So this is an initiative that we worked with the White House, a campaign. If you are on social media and do a hashtag Rally for Recovery, and really what it's about is to make sure that businesses can get back to business as usual, to make sure that their employees are vaccinated, to make sure that they have a safe and comfortable working environment. But we also make sure that governments are making sure, or the state and local governments are starting to reopen as we see more and more vaccinations get out there and kind of the positivity rates drop. We want to see businesses get back to work, and so that's part of it. And then on top of that is that rebuilding phase. That's why we want to focus on some sort sort of economic stimulus. It's not necessarily related to, we from the chamber, in our perspective, don't think that the Paycheck Protection Program, we think that businesses really kind of had been able to use that resource enough. What we want to see is more targeted, more specific relief, because there's businesses out there that have really fallen through the cracks. We'll probably want to see the Restaurant Revitalization Fund to get some sort of additional funding. Yeah, as long as we can make sure that we can get back to work, and we're rallying for that sort of recovery.
Excellent. And I in the chat if anybody wants to dig a little deeper onto that. We have a question if the restrictions on how the city and county governments can use the funds they receive from the federal government. And I'll make note that while Petoskey will receive $570,000, Emmett County will receive $6.4 million in that total. So what restrictions are in place, and how do we get involved in making sure that voices are heard for where we would like to see those things go?
So good question. So first, money can't be, again, spent for any sort of pensions. That was a big initiative for the chamber. But how money can be spent is really the more appropriate question. Again, it's for any sort of government service that perhaps lost revenue as a result of the pandemic. That's where money can be spent. But it's really at the discretion of your local and city leaders to spend money in certain households that have lost money, industries that those are everyone here is at the boots on the ground that knows the industries and households that are struggling. That's where money can be spent. Also to know where money can't be spent, any sort of tax cut that happened after March 6th of this year, any revenue loss of that really can't be used for that as well.
Excellent, thank you. I have a comment. It says, over the past few decades, CEO compensation ratios compared to the average median employee have increased drastically and disproportionately benefited from increases in technology and productivity. This has contributed to decreased emergency and retirement savings, inability to attain housing, failing marriage and fertility rates, and other unsustainable trends. Is there anything that the U.S. Chamber is looking to do to help reverse the increasing ratio and implement long-term solutions without adding the cost to the federal debt? It's a long question.
That's a good question. Well, first, there's a piece of legislation that Congress is considering out there this week called the Pay Equity Act. And we obviously think, that's not quite the question, but we want to see the gap of gender disquality close. However, this sort of piece of legislation is a little overreaching and puts too much so on the burden, too much on the backs of small businesses. But also at the chamber, we'd like to see the pay equity between CEOs and their employees decrease. And so that's something that we're advocated for at the federal level.
Excellent, thank you. While we're waiting to see if we have any other questions pop up, Ryan, what are the 2021 policy priorities? We just mentioned this for the U.S. Chamber.
Well, there's quite a lot. As I mentioned, obviously, the biggest one is infrastructure. We want to see that get passed. It's long overdue for that to get done. Workforce development, as I mentioned, if we can get that passed through this infrastructure package, that's also a big positive. Immigration, I think at this point in time, some sort of solution needs to be tackled with it. We've seen, obviously, somewhat of a crisis on the border. We'd like to see that get adjusted. Cybersecurity, particularly as it relates to, as we see this kind of this 5G rollout, we want to make sure that our cybersecurity is strong and safe. A number of other things as well. I can't name them all off the top of my head, but I'd be happy to get back to you.
Thank you very much. And you did just mention something with workforce that we're seeing here where we are, obviously very tourism based. And you had mentioned that, when we had the $600 in the initial CARES Act for unemployment compensation, and there was a lot of discussion about getting people back to work. And now the 300 is much more manageable and palatable, but still, with that being extended until September, are you hearing concerns from businesses in bringing back employees? We have a critical concern here in our area, and it isn't just related to that. There's the fact that you have a family member who now was exposed, so they're quarantined for 14 days and trying to maintain any sort of standardized employee hours so that you can actually operate for our small businesses, we're fearing is going to be a problem going forward. Are you hearing that on a larger scale as well?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's certainly something that we've heard, particularly, like the Alliance, that Kirsty's on, areas that are really small and are big into tourism. We see that be a big issue. And so the question is, how can we make sure that, Mackinac Island, like to see that succeed. And we know that we've had issues with them having the number of workers to really fulfill the jobs necessary. And so it's working with the federal government on certain ways that we can help, with workforce development, because, the tourism industry is going to change, and how the federal government can best help is something that we're working on.
That actually ties right into another question as far as, did the U.S. Chamber take a position on worker visa issues like the H-2B and the J-1?
So yeah, as I had said, immigration is a big issue for us, and it included that really our visas. We need to make sure that those individuals with work visas that they can stay here, can work, because right now there's a lot of questions regarding that. So we're pushing to make sure that that's clarified and permanent, so that industries such as the tourism industry has the workers necessary to fulfill those jobs.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That's all good. And what we'll do now, we're making time just right. We've got a couple minutes left, so we'll throw things back to the floor. And Ryan will stay with us for a few more minutes. So if you want to find him and have a question, by all means do so. And as I said, we'll get this recording out to everyone, as well as all the slides from the event today. Ryan, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Lots of good information, and we know things are going to continue, obviously, as we look at the American Rescue Plan moving forward, and the Restaurant Revitalization Act and the shuttered venue, all of those things. We still have so much more coming from this package of relief that we have to stay up to date with, and we utilize. I would just note is we're seeing the rollout still with the Shuttered Grant Program and the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. You can look to the U.S. Chamber to put out guides. So I'm sure, hopefully, a number of you on the call, during the pandemic, we put out a number of useful guides like the Paycheck Protection Program, EIDL grants. I mean, these guides were so successful that the SBA themselves were actually using them in their social media. So look forward in the coming weeks for us to have guides out there for your members to kind of easily walk through the process. Our website's loaded with your information. We've used it from day one, since the pandemic set in. So yeah, I was going to remind everybody that if you go to our Petoskey Strong page on our website, you will find all the latest information per the U.S. Chamber in regards to the shuttered venue grants, PPP, employee retention tax credit, which is one of my favorite, most underutilized options that you have as a small business. So we pass that information along always, because you do really excellent work, the U.S. Chamber does, on those guides. Very informative. So
thank you.
All right, let's go back to the floor. We've got a few minutes left, and hopefully people can ask a few more questions if they want to, or just have a quick conversation. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you again, Ryan, from the U.S. Chamber, and we'll see you on the floor.